On Monday, August 17, 2026, Queen Camilla was photographed only a few miles from Balmoral with her daughter Laura Lopes, her sister Annabel Elliot, and granddaughter Eliza, while Laura's twin sons Gus and Harry were also reported on the family outing. 24 hours later, on Tuesday, August 18th, King Charles formally began his summer stay at Balmoral. Then the mood changed, because the account now moving around this royal gathering says Prince William and Catherine backed a new rule for the opening days, and Camilla's own relatives discovered what it meant when their luggage was stopped before it could go inside. That is where this becomes difficult to ignore. Camilla herself was not refused entry. The Queen still had her place beside Charles. The problem was the people arriving with her. A black vehicle came up the Balmoral Drive late in the afternoon, with another following behind. Laura stepped out. Small cases began coming out. Nothing looked unusual until a member of the Balmoral household quietly told the driver to leave those cases in the vehicle. The luggage stopped. Camilla turned. No shouting across the drive. No public scene. Just a quiet instruction that became more uncomfortable because nobody wanted to explain it. Laura was standing there. The cases were still beside the vehicle. Camilla looked toward the entrance, then back toward the car. Everyone had arrived as family. Yet someone inside Balmoral was suddenly treating part of that family as though they were not staying. The timing made it sharper. Camilla had just been seen in nearby Balmoral enjoying an ordinary family outing. Charles had formally arrived at the estate. Other royals were gathering in Scotland. Balmoral was moving into the private weeks when generations normally come together. So why, at that exact moment, would Laura Lopes and Camilla's grandchildren find their bags going no farther than the car? The answer, according to the account at the centre of this story, was an opening arrangement supported by William and Catherine. For the first part of the gathering, the castle was to be kept to the King, the Queen, the immediate royal family, their spouses and children. No extra personal guests arriving with luggage, no wider private relatives assuming rooms were available. Later, Charles could invite others. But first, Balmoral would begin as a tightly defined royal family stay. There was one problem nobody seemed to have settled. What exactly did family mean? To William and Catherine, the answer was supposed to be clear. The protected period concerned the royal family itself. To Camilla, the word landed differently. Laura was not a friend, she was her daughter. The teenagers beside her were not casual guests, they were her grandchildren. Camilla therefore had a question that was simple and hard to dismiss. If her own children did not count during a family-only stay, whose family was the rule really protecting? That question mattered because the answer would decide whether Camilla had encountered an ordinary household boundary or something aimed directly at the people closest to her. Before anyone could give her that answer, Princess Anne appeared. Anne knew about the arrangement. She supported the idea that one rule had to apply to everybody. Camilla looked toward her and asked whether there was a problem. Royal watchers, this is where your voice matters. If you believe William is right to protect Balmoral from becoming a place where Camilla's private family gets special treatment simply because she is queen, do not just watch in silence and move on. Comment, "Stand firm, William," below so everyone can see where you stand. And if you are tired of watching Camilla push for privileges that other members of the family would never expect, then prove it by hitting like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video with another royal watcher. It costs you nothing, but staying silent only makes it look as though nobody cares when William and Catherine finally draw a line. Anne's answer was almost unnervingly simple. There was no problem with Camilla. She was welcome. Her place had not been questioned. Then Anne looked toward Laura, the grandchildren, and the luggage that had never crossed the entrance. They were not staying. For a second, the dispute changed shape. This was not Camilla being thrown out of Balmoral. It was more awkward. The Queen could walk back inside, but her daughter and grandchildren could not simply follow with their bags. Camilla's title opened the door for Camilla. It did not automatically open the same door for every member of her private family. Camilla did not accept that distinction easily. She wanted to know how anyone could call the arrangement family only while drawing a line through her own children. Anne did not deny that Laura was family. She did not deny the grandchildren. Instead, the explanation went to the heart of the rule. Camilla belonged to the opening royal gathering because she was Charles's wife and queen. Her adult children had not become members of the royal family simply because their mother married the king. And that left one question hanging over the Balmoral drive. Camilla wanted the name behind the decision, not the staff member who stopped the cases, not Anne who was explaining it. Who created the boundary? Anne paused before giving the answer. William and Catherine. That answer changed everything, because Camilla now had a darker possibility to consider. Had William and Catherine created a neutral rule that happened to catch her family on the wrong side of it, or had they known exactly who was coming to Balmoral and built the rule to stop them? And if so, Camilla was about to demand an answer from William. Camilla's next move was not anger, it was precision. If William and Catherine had written the rule, then she wanted to understand what they thought they were protecting and where they believed her family stood. Anne had already made one thing clear. Camilla could remain. Laura and the grandchildren could not stay during the opening period. But that answer only sharpened the argument. Because Camilla could point to something no one around that driveway could deny. Laura was not a casual guest. She was not an acquaintance from London. She was Camilla's daughter. The teenagers with her were Camilla's grandchildren. In any ordinary family, that would settle it. Family meant family. Yet Balmoral was suddenly operating with a second definition, one that separated personal relatives from members of the royal family itself. Anne did not argue about blood. She argued about status. The protected opening stay, she explained, had been drawn around the king, the queen, the immediate royal family, their spouses and their children. Camilla had a place there because she was Charles's wife and queen. Her children had not become royal simply because their mother had married the monarch. That sounded technical, but beside an open vehicle with luggage waiting outside, it did not feel technical. It felt personal. Camilla's attention moved from Anne back toward the entrance. William and Catherine were nowhere in sight yet. If they had built this arrangement before the family arrived, then there were only two possibilities. Either the rule applied to everyone, or it had been designed with one family in mind. So Camilla tested the second possibility. Had William known Laura was coming? Anne's answer was no. Had Catherine known? Again, no. The arrangement had been discussed before anyone knew exactly who Camilla intended to bring for the opening days. That removed the easiest accusation. Camilla could still dislike the rule. She could call it rigid. She could say it misunderstood what family meant to her. But she could no longer simply say William had seen Laura's name and built a barrier around her. That forced Camilla to change direction. Fine. If Laura was not part of the royal family, then she was not arriving as a guest either. She was arriving as Camilla's daughter. Surely a daughter could not be reduced to the same category as a friend invited for a weekend. Anne's response closed that door almost immediately. If every person inside Balmoral could bring private relatives and simply rename them family, then the restriction meant nothing. One cousin would become family. One sibling would become family. Adult children, in-laws, family friends treated like relatives, all could arrive under that argument. The protected opening period would disappear before it had properly begun. Camilla listened, but she was not finished. Then she asked the question Anne knew would come sooner or later. What about Catherine's parents? That changed the atmosphere again. For the first time, the issue stopped being about Camilla alone. Carol and Michael Middleton were not royal by birth. They were Catherine's parents, grandparents to William and Catherine's children, and part of the Princess of Wales's private family. If they could arrive with luggage and stay while Laura could not, then Camilla would have the strongest argument of the afternoon. But Anne's answer did not give her that opening. Number. If Carol and Michael Middleton arrived during the protected opening period, expecting rooms inside Balmoral, the restriction would apply. They could visit later. They could join another family occasion. but they would not receive an exception simply because they were Catherine's parents. That was the first moment the rule became harder for Camilla to describe as a personal attack. The same boundary that kept Laura outside also kept Catherine's own parents outside. That mattered, because fairness is easy to promise when the rule costs nothing. It becomes real when the person defending it has already accepted the same loss. Still, Camilla had one question Anne could not answer for William. Why make the rule so strict in the first place? Balmoral had always carried a different feeling from the formal palaces. It was private, relaxed by royal standards, a place where family traditions mixed with ordinary routines. If the point was to bring the family together, why begin by drawing new lines around who counted? Anne could explain the principle. She could defend consistency. But she could not speak for every reason William and Catherine had discussed behind closed doors. And now someone had gone to find them. That changed the driveway more than any raised voice could have done. Laura remained close to the vehicle. The luggage had still not crossed the entrance. Camilla stood with the knowledge that the rule had not been invented after her family arrived, and that Catherine's own parents would face the same restriction. Then movement appeared near the stone entrance. William was coming. Catherine was with him. And Camilla was about to ask them the question Anne could not settle for them. If this rule was truly about fairness, why did it have to begin with her family standing outside? William and Catherine did not hurry toward the vehicle. That was the first thing Camilla noticed. They came across the grounds at a measured pace, several meters from the car, with the stone face of Balmoral behind them and Anne still closer to the driveway. By then, some of the luggage had already been moved back toward the vehicle. Laura remained near the open door. Nothing about the scene looked explosive. That almost made it worse. There was no crowd, no line of staff watching from the steps. Just a family disagreement unfolding in open space where everyone could see which bags were going inside and which were not. Camilla walked toward William before anyone else could speak. Her first question was direct. Had he known her family were coming? William answered no. Camilla held his gaze. Then she asked the question that mattered more. Would it have changed anything? There was a pause. Number. One word. That was all. No long explanation. No apology dressed up as protocol. No attempt to soften what the answer meant. William was saying that even if he had known Laura and the grandchildren were on their way, the rule would still have stood. For Camilla, that removed one suspicion and created another. Perhaps the rule had not been designed around her family after all. But if William had been prepared to enforce it against them anyway, then who had insisted it needed to be so absolute? The answer did not come from William. It came from Catherine. The strict part of the arrangement had been hers. That landed differently. William had considered whether there should be room for parents and grandparents during the opening days. Catherine had pushed back. Not because she wanted Camilla's relatives excluded, but because she could already see the problem that any exception would create. If Carol and Michael Middleton could stay because they were Catherine's parents, then Camilla could reasonably ask why Laura should be treated differently. If one side received an exemption, the other side would demand the same. And if both sides received exemptions, the rule was finished. Catherine had therefore accepted the restriction on her own family before Camilla ever challenged it. That changed the balance of the argument. Camilla could still say the rule was too rigid. She could still say it placed royal status above ordinary family bonds. But she could no longer point at Catherine and say she had built a privilege for the Middletons while closing the door on everyone else. The cost had already been accepted on both sides, and Catherine had accepted it first. For Camilla, that was harder to answer. Catherine was not demanding a sacrifice she had refused herself. The rule might feel cold, but hypocrisy was no longer easy to claim. For viewers following every turn of this Balmoral dispute, the question becomes very simple. Was Catherine right to insist on one rule for everyone, or should Camilla's children have been given an exception? If the rule should apply equally, like the video and put same rule in the comments. And if these royal family decisions matter to you, subscribe, because stories like this are easy to watch in silence, but the viewers who speak up are the ones who keep the conversation alive. Camilla was not ready to let the matter end there. Her attention shifted from Catherine back to William. The driveway had become a test of something larger than accommodation. It was now a test of whether William and Catherine could set a family boundary that touched the Queen personally and still expect it to survive. Camilla made one more attempt. Her family had travelled to Scotland. They were already there. Nobody was asking for some permanent privilege. Could there not be one night, one temporary exception, one simple act of discretion? William did not move. Catherine did not retreat. The answer remained the same. If they changed the arrangement at the first difficult moment, then there had never really been an arrangement at all. That was when Camilla understood something important. There was still one person above William. One person whose word could settle the matter immediately. Charles. The entire confrontation had been taking place around his private Scottish residence. Camilla was his wife. Laura was his stepdaughter. The grandchildren were part of the wider family that had spent years around royal occasions. If anyone could decide that this rule had gone too far, it was the king. So Camilla stopped arguing with William. She stopped trying to persuade Catherine. She turned away from the car and headed back toward Balmoral with a different purpose. Anne watched her go. William said nothing. Catherine remained beside him. And for the first time since the luggage had been stopped, the next move no longer belonged to the Prince and Princess of Wales. It belonged to Charles, because Camilla was about to ask him for the one thing William and Catherine had refused to give her, an exception. And if Charles granted it, the new Balmoral rule would collapse on its very first test. Camilla did not go to Charles with the same argument she had used outside. That mattered. By the time she reached him, the dispute was no longer about wording, protocol, or whether Laura technically counted as part of the royal family. Camilla made it personal. These were her children, her grandchildren. They had travelled to Scotland, arrived at Balmoral, and were now being asked to leave before the family gathering had properly begun. She did not ask Charles to challenge William in front of everyone. She did not ask him to rebuke Catherine. She asked for something that sounded smaller. One night. That was all. One night inside Balmoral. Then the wider arrangement could continue exactly as William and Catherine wanted. It was the kind of request designed to sound reasonable because the cost of saying yes seemed so small. No permanent change, no public reversal, no dramatic announcement. Just one exception for people who were already there. Charles listened in silence. He did not answer immediately. That pause became important because Camilla had every reason to believe the king could end the problem in seconds. Balmoral was his private Scottish residence. She was his wife. Laura was his stepdaughter. If Charles simply said the family could stay for one night, who was going to stop them? But Charles did not begin with permission. He began with a question. If he made an exception for Camilla, would William then have to make the same exception for Catherine? Camilla knew exactly what he meant. If Laura could stay because she was the Queen's daughter, then Carol and Michael Middleton could reasonably ask to stay because they were Catherine's parents. And it would not stop there. Anne's wider family could ask for the same courtesy. Edward could make the same argument for people close to his household. One special case would immediately become the example used by everyone else. The rule would not bend. It would disappear. That was the point Charles could not ignore. Camilla had come to him asking for compassion. Charles was now being forced to think about consequence. A rule that survives only when nobody important objects is not much of a rule at all. Still, Charles did not tell Camilla her family were unwelcome. That distinction was crucial. He offered another way forward. Laura and the grandchildren could return later in the Balmoral stay. They could spend time with Camilla nearby. They could join an agreed family occasion once the protected opening period had passed. Nothing about the arrangement meant they were forbidden from Scotland, cut off from Camilla, or permanently excluded from future visits. but they would not stay inside Balmoral that night. And Charles would not overturn William and Catherine. That was the decision. Quiet, measured, final. For Camilla, the disappointment was larger than the practical problem of where Laura would sleep. She had gone to the one person she believed could remove the boundary without debate. Instead, Charles had allowed the boundary to stand. That changed the meaning of everything happening outside. Until that moment, William and Catherine's rule could still have been dismissed as a position waiting for the king to correct it. Now it had survived the only challenge that truly mattered. Charles had been asked. Charles had considered it. Charles had said no. By the time the message reached the driveway, the atmosphere had shifted again. The luggage was being returned fully to the vehicles now. Laura was no longer waiting to hear whether an exception might appear at the last second. The practical decision had been made. Anne remained nearby. William and Catherine stayed closer to the entrance, giving Camilla and her family space, rather than turning the departure into a spectacle. Then came the detail that made the moment far more difficult for Camilla than simply being told to leave. She was not being told to leave. Camilla was still welcome inside Balmoral. Her room remained available. Her place beside Charles remained unchanged. Nobody had removed her from the gathering. Nobody had asked her to surrender anything. The vehicle was waiting for her family, not for her. And suddenly the dispute was no longer about who had authority over a guest list. It became a choice. Camilla could walk back toward Balmoral and remain there as queen while Laura and the grandchildren drove away. Or she could leave with them. For several moments, neither option looked easy. If she stayed, the rule had won in the clearest possible way. Her family would leave and she would remain behind with the people who had refused them an exception. If she went, nobody could say William had expelled her. Nobody could say Catherine had ordered her out. The decision would be Camilla's own. That was what made the silence around the vehicle so heavy. Laura was already preparing to leave. Charles had refused to intervene. William and Catherine were not changing their position. And Camilla was now standing between the castle and the car with one question left. Would she go back inside as queen, or leave Balmoral as a mother? For a few seconds, Camilla did not move. The car door was open. Laura was already inside, the grandchildren close by, and the last of the cases had been returned to the vehicle. Behind Camilla stood Balmoral, quiet and unchanged, the place where she could still walk back in and take her place beside Charles as though nothing had happened. That was the hardest part. No one had ordered her away. No one had told her she was unwelcome. William had not asked her to leave. Catherine had not blocked her path. Charles had not withdrawn her place. The rule had stopped at her family. Camilla looked toward the entrance, then back at the car. She had spent the entire afternoon arguing that Laura and the grandchildren were not outsiders. They were her family. If she now turned around and remained inside while they drove away, the distinction she had fought against would become painfully real in front of everyone. Queen inside, mother outside. For once, title and family were pulling in opposite directions. Anne watched without stepping forward. William and Catherine stayed where they were. Nobody rushed to Camilla with another explanation. Nobody tried to persuade her. The choice had become hers, and that made the next movement more powerful than any argument on the driveway. Camilla walked to the vehicle. She hesitated at the open door. Then she got in. The door closed. And just like that, the question that had followed the entire confrontation had its answer. Camilla chose her family. That decision changed how the scene would be remembered. William had not thrown the Queen out of Balmoral. Catherine had not banished her. Charles had not sent his wife away. Camilla left because the people she had arrived with could not remain during the protected opening period, and she decided she would not stay behind without them. The vehicle pulled away from the entrance. No one followed. That detail mattered, because departures like this can sometimes force an immediate retreat. A family member leaves upset, someone inside decides the cost is too high, and within minutes the original decision is softened. A call is made, An exception appears. Everyone is invited back before the disagreement grows. That did not happen. Later, when the estate had quieted, William reportedly raised the question himself. Had they gone too far? Not because he suddenly believed the rule was unfair. What concerned him was what came next. Balmoral was supposed to bring the family together. If the opening days began with Camilla leaving beside her daughter and grandchildren, the argument could easily outlive the visit itself. William understood the image the situation created. Camilla driving away, her family beside her, the Prince and Princess of Wales remaining behind. It could harden into something bigger than a rule about rooms. So William considered whether the arrangement should be adjusted before the next day. Perhaps wider relatives could be admitted under a narrow exception. Perhaps there was a way to preserve the purpose of the protected period without allowing this one disagreement to become a permanent fracture. Catherine did not agree. Her reasoning was simple. If the rule changed immediately because the first person affected by it objected, then the rule had never really existed. That was the point she had been protecting from the beginning. The restriction had already cost her something too. Her own parents would not have been exempt. She had accepted that before Camilla's family ever reached the drive. Rewriting it now would not look compassionate. It would look as though the boundary applied only until someone powerful enough pushed back. Catherine held her position. Anne agreed. Then Charles did too. That was the second decision of the day that Camilla had not expected. The first had kept her family from staying. The second made sure their departure did not erase the rule. There was no urgent message telling the vehicle to return, no sudden instruction reopening the rooms, no private reversal waiting for Camilla by the time she reached her destination. Balmoral remained exactly as it had been when she left. And that silence carried its own message. For years, royal disagreements had often been softened behind closed doors before anyone could tell where the line truly stood. This time, the line remained visible. Camilla had objected. She had appealed to Charles. She had left with her family. And still, nobody inside Balmoral rushed to undo the decision. By the end of the evening, the argument was no longer about whether Laura and the grandchildren had been allowed to stay. It was about something much larger. A boundary had been tested by the Queen herself, and it had survived. What remained unanswered was whether that boundary would hold once consequences from Camilla's departure reached the wider family. By the next morning, the argument had moved beyond one driveway and one family visit. The question inside Balmoral was no longer whether Camilla had been upset. Everyone understood that. The harder question was what the new rule now meant for every future arrival during the protected opening period. Once a boundary had been enforced against the Queen's own relatives, it could no longer be treated as a casual suggestion. That changed the atmosphere. Staff did not need a dramatic announcement. They had seen enough to understand the principle. A royal title gave the person holding it a place. It did not automatically extend that place to every adult relative around them. The distinction was uncomfortable, but it was now visible in a way it had not been before. And that was why William and Catherine could not soften it after the fact. If they had rewritten the arrangement the moment Camilla objected, every future decision would carry the same weakness. One person would ask for an exception, another would point to that exception. Soon the entire opening period would become a negotiation over whose relatives mattered most. Catherine had wanted to prevent that from the beginning, not because she wanted a smaller family circle for its own sake. The logic was simpler. Balmoral could either begin with a clear rule or begin with a list of special cases. It could not do both. That distinction also protected William and Catherine from the accusation Camilla had feared most. This was not a rule that said Camilla's family could never come to Balmoral. Laura was not permanently excluded. The grandchildren were not being told they could never return. Camilla herself had never lost her place there. The restriction concerned the opening period, when William and Catherine wanted the gathering kept to the immediate royal households before wider private relatives and guests joined later. That made the final result more subtle than a ban. and, in some ways, more powerful. Because Camilla had not lost a room, she had discovered a limit. Her position as queen carried enormous status, but it did not automatically convert her children into members of the royal family. It did not give them the same standing as William, Catherine, Anne, Edward, or the royal children simply because they were close to the king through her. That was the part of the story that would linger. The cars had gone, the luggage had gone, the argument on the drive had ended. Yet the principle remained behind. One rule, one standard. No private exemption simply because the request came from the Queen. Charles's role made that even more significant. He had been given the easiest possible opportunity to undo the arrangement. He could have called it a misunderstanding. He could have allowed one night and promised to review everything later. Instead, he allowed the boundary to remain in place. That decision gave William and Catherine something beyond a victory in a family disagreement. It gave their rule legitimacy there. And once that happened, another question became unavoidable. Who else might discover that long-standing familiarity with Balmoral no longer guaranteed automatic access during those opening days? Carol and Michael Middleton had been used as the clearest test. Catherine had accepted that her own parents would face the same restriction. Anne's wider family could not demand a different standard. Edward's private guests could not simply assume rooms were available. The rule had survived because nobody was supposed to stand above it. That is why Camilla's departure mattered even after the car disappeared from view. She had challenged the boundary at its most sensitive point. It held. For viewers who believe that one family rule should mean one family rule, this is the moment to make that view count. Leave a comment saying whether William and Catherine were right to refuse every exception, and subscribe if the next decision inside Balmoral matters just as much as this one. A quiet rule can change a family faster than a public argument, and the people who follow these stories closely are often the first to notice when that change becomes permanent. But this story does not end with the driveway. The next question is waiting inside Balmoral, and it may be more uncomfortable. If Camilla's children could not stay during the protected opening period, what happens when the same rule is tested by Catherine's own parents? Because the next video will look at the one detail that could either prove William and Catherine were completely consistent or expose the first crack in the rule they fought so hard to defend, whether Carol and Michael Middleton would be turned back if they arrived at Balmoral with luggage. That is the test nobody inside the family can explain away when it counts.